Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our series of webinars focused on bringing you information about COVID-19 related topics. The information in these weekly webinars is geared toward long-term care and skilled nursing facilities, but we encourage everyone who is interested to attend. My name is Kathy Caudill. I'm a communications specialist with Quality Insights. Also joining us today is Shirley Sullivan. Shirley has been a nurse for 25 years and is a quality improvement specialist for Quality Insights with our QIN-QIO nursing home project. Shirley, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So today we will be talking about COVID-19 variants, vaccines, and therapeutics. As we mentioned last week, today's webinar will be a little different. We will be watching a recording of a webinar that our Community Coalitions project held last Wednesday with special guest Dr. Krista Capehart. Afterwards, Shirley and I will hold a Q&A for those of us who are here today. Overall, this webinar will be about an hour long. There's a lot of great information in there. Everyone will be on mute, but we encourage you to drop questions or comments in the chat throughout the webinar for our discussion at the end. And now I will briefly introduce our guest speaker before playing the recording of her presentation. Krista Capehart is a clinical professor in the Department of Clinical Pharmacy and director of the Wigner Institute for Advanced Pharmacy Practice, Education, and Research at the West Virginia University School of Pharmacy. She is also the director of Professional and Regulatory Affairs at the West Virginia Board of Pharmacy, and she serves as the pharmacy lead for the West Virginia Interagency Task Force for COVID-19 vaccine and therapeutics distribution. And now I'm going to share my screen and begin the presentation, and we will see you all at the end for discussion.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for having me today, Natalie. I appreciate it. And so I'm going to take you through all kinds of stuff COVID. We're going to talk about variants, vaccines, therapeutics. We did just get a brand new vaccine yesterday. We don't quite have it in the state yet, simply because there's a couple final steps that we have to have done. But tell you a little bit about that, what our most frequent variants are, variants of concern right now, where we are with vaccines, and then finally we'll finish up with if the variants keep coming and our vaccines and the variants break through the vaccines, what do we have out there and what should we be selecting to treat these patients with? So we'll go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, we're going to look at our variants of concern and what we anticipate is going to be coming, as well as discuss those current variants and what we're seeing here in West Virginia. We're also going to talk about our vaccines, particularly our newest changes. So that's what we're talking about with our kids under age 5, as well as the new Moderna products, because those have just come out. We no longer have a gap in Moderna availability because we didn't have any Moderna products for under age 18. We do now. And then the Novavax product, going to throw that in, even though that one just got FDA authorization about 7 p.m. last night. And then we'll look at our COVID-19 outpatient therapeutic recommendations. When we do have those COVID positive patients, what truly should we be looking at first line, second line, third line? Because initially all we heard about once we finally did get therapeutics was monoclonals. Well, it turns out that now our monoclonals are not truly our first line agent. So what should we be turning to and what works best? So I wanted to kind of give you this. I found this picture. If you haven't been following Dr. Eric Topol, he has some very interesting pieces out there. And he has this graphic description, which I think really gives us a pictorial illustration of, we hear all of these different variants. If the center is that original Wuhan version of SARS-CoV-2, where do all of these other variants come from? Where do they stand? How much different are they actually from that original one? And so this kind of shows you, gives you a graphical, pictorial description of kind of how far apart or how much different they are. And that kind of gives us a little bit better understanding of maybe why our vaccines may not be working as well, why they work better against some variants than others. So if you take a look here, you'll remember our Delta. We had a huge surge with Delta here in West Virginia, as we did all across the country and really all across the globe. That was in last September. Then that was followed up then by the Omicron surge here in January. And then we've moved on to Omicron subvariant types. And we're now currently getting into this B4, B5 subvariant type. And unfortunately, that's where we're moving into. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the BA4, 5 subvariant type. There is one that's not on here. It is actually a BA 2.75 that's now appearing in South Africa. And that may be what follows BA 4, 5. I wanted to show you this to kind of give you a little bit better understanding, just so you can kind of graphically realize how different the variants may be. So this shows you from April to this week what nationally are the most prominent variants. Now you'll see 4 and 5 are making up nationally the most predominant strains. I will tell you in West Virginia, we're estimating that we are usually about 4 to 6 weeks behind what is predominant nationally. And it's estimated that here in West Virginia, we are about 36% 4-5 combination. So, we're actually probably back around, June, middle of June is where we were, is where we are right now, with the other two, with 212.1. and BA2 being the other strains. But 4 and 5 are already here. We know they're here. We are seeing them. Why do we know they're here? Because we're seeing the symptoms. And it is a bit of a different picture. We've seen hospitalizations go up. I didn't check today, but I know they're up over 300. Hospitalizations are really one of the main pictures we look at because we know that the case numbers is not a viable number to watch anymore because there's so much home testing going on. Some of the symptoms, we are seeing that BA5 is less sensitive to the neutralizing antibodies. And basically what that means to us is that patients can get this same version over and over. So just because they had it doesn't mean they can't get it again. And just because, so there isn't that continuing protection that we've seen before. Runny nose, sore throat, headache, cough, fatigue. And we are seeing that it's affecting the lower airways more than, say, the earlier Omicron strains. Now, that is not good news because we are starting to see ventilator use go up in some cases as well. And I already mentioned that cross protection is not very good. So as we move throughout, unfortunately, we are anticipating that we will continue to see hospitalizations go up because of BA4 and 5. How high they will go, will it be as bad as Omicron in January and our Delta surge in September? I hope not. But we are concerned, and we'll continue to watch. Pretty much most of the state is back into the areas where we would recommend, where the CDC is recommending masking. And so we just have to keep that in mind. In terms of numbers, most of the time, if you look at our numbers and factor in the home testing that's happening, they say multiply it by about 7, and that's probably real number of cases. So I want to talk a little bit first, because it's our first line of defense is, of course, our vaccines. We do for adults, we are at a point where our original vaccines now, we have certain groups of the population, so those over age 50 and those 12 and up who are immunocompromised can now get a second booster. And we're recommending that they do so. There's a lot of discussion of should I get it now, should I wait till the fall? If they're in that over 50 category or immunocompromised, I would recommend that they go ahead and get it now. We are anticipating, and the FDA has given the nod for an Omicron specific vaccine, but we're not expecting that until probably mid to late October, maybe 1st of October. But by that point, you're looking at 3 months out. Those individuals would be eligible for, we anticipate that vaccine, because it will be Omicron specific, would be eligible for that dose as well. So we know that additional booster, particularly in the 65 and older, reduces death and severe disease by about 25%. So we are recommending it. So I wanted to go ahead and get that. But our newest population that was previously unprotected is the under 4 population. And we did just have 2 new vaccines authorized. We have the Pfizer, which is a 3-dose series. And we have the Moderna, which is a 2-dose series. And it's actually for ages 6 months through 5 years. Then Moderna went back and got authorization for a product for kids ages 6 through 11 years, and then an authorization for their current product for ages 12 through 17. And then finally, yesterday, we got authorization for Novavax, which is when we look at COVID-19 vaccines, it's not an mRNA, it's an adjuvanted vaccine. So it goes back to our older technology, which is why people are thinking that maybe we may be able to pick up people that we weren't covering before, who were not comfortable with the new mRNA technology, that we might be able to get a few more people vaccinated with this Novavax. And it was authorized for 18 and older. So can I tell you a little bit about these products? Just because they are different from the ones that we have out there right now. So the Pfizer 6 months through 4 years, we have these great wall charts. They're available on FDA's website. It's at the link below. You've probably all seen the gray cap product. It's 12 years and older. Very little of the purple is available anymore. That was the original one, and it required dilution prior to use. But for 12 years and older, we have the gray cap, does not require dilution, and it's a 0.3 ml injection. And then back last November, we got the 5 through 11-year-old. It's a purple cap with a purple label. And then our brand new product is a maroon cap, and it is a 6 months through 4 years. Does require different dilution and a dose volume of 0.2. It's important to recognize that you can't just adjust how you dilute these products and use the same vial for different age groups. You do specifically have to have that product for that age group with these. Looking at storage, fortunately now we're at a place where all of the Pfizer product comes in an ultra low cold freezer and could be stored that way for 12 months. But if you order them, you can keep them in the refrigerator for 10 weeks. And then once you take them out, they can be kept at room temperature for 12 hours. For 12 hours once you puncture. The orange cap and maroon cap both do still have to be diluted. So that brand new product has 10 doses per vial. One thing I want to bring to your attention, this product was actually manufactured and labeled prior to it gaining authorization. These are the first shipments of these are actually the same product that was used in the initial studies of this product. And so when you get your vials, they may actually be labeled for ages 2 years to less than 5 or 6 months to less than 5. But that product is good for ages 6 months through 4 years. The company Pfizer was not certain what authorization ages they were going to be able to get, and the FDA has authorized those products, even though they say 2 years to less than 5 or 6 months to less than 5, that those products can be used 6 months through 4 years. And the FDA has issued a provider letter that's available on the FDA's website, so that you know that it is perfectly fine to utilize this product in that age group. Just a couple of things in terms of storage and handling. You can't refreeze the vaccine. And remember, on these emergency use authorized vaccines, they have manufacturer dates, not expiration dates on them. So that's a little new for all of us. And all the time, the current emergency use authorization is going to supersede anything that's on the file. So you always want to go to the emergency use authorization to see the newest updated information. Just to reiterate, for ages ages 6 months through 4 years, it's a 3-dose series. But sometimes you're going to have those kids that turn 5 in the middle of the series. And so they have put out guidance in terms of what you should do in those situations. And basically the FDA and the CDC have recommended that whatever age child that child is on the day of the vaccine, you give them that dose. So looking at Moderna, Moderna is 6 months through 5 years. So this is a little bit different than the Pfizer product. It does not require dilution. None of the Moderna products do. And it is a 2-dose series, 0.25 mLs, and you're going to do them 1 month apart. Now, interesting thing about this, the FDA and the CDC both authorized a 3rd dose if the child is immunocompromised. So while it's normally a 2-dose series, if the child is immunocompromised, you can give them a 3rd dose, and that is 1 month following the 2nd dose. And I have some charts here that will help to clarify that. So I wanted to show you the wall chart that's available for Moderna. So this red cap, light blue product is what we've all had since December of 2020. The magenta is the one that is for 6 months through 5 years. These 2 products in the middle here, the one that has the purple label is the one that we will be seeing first. And it is for ages 6 years through 11 years, and also for those 18 and older booster. Now, it does say booster doses only. However, this is another one of those labeling issues. This product can be used for both 6 years through 11 and 18 years and older boosters. And then the red cap with light blue is for 12 and older primary series and 18 and older booster doses. So I wanted to go over that for you. So let's look at what is going to happen here for our 6 years through 11 and our Moderna 12 through 17. I told you now we don't have a gap in our Moderna products. So basically they told us that the Moderna in the dark blue cap with a purple border, for 6 through 11 years of age, you can do 2 doses 4 weeks apart, and those are 0.5 mLs. And then with your, if you have an immunocompromised individual 6 through 11, you may give a 3rd dose, 0.5 mLs, at least 4 weeks after the 2nd dose. So basically the same recommendations we saw with the 6 months through 5 years. Here is just a slide that points out again this purple, dark blue and purple labeled product that even though it says booster doses only, again, these were manufactured during the study. And so rather than waste that product, the FDA has issued a letter that says you can use this for primary series doses for ages 6 months through 11 years. Now, those 12 years through 17, this goes back to that original product we had from December of 2020. So your red cap product with the light blue label, and it's a primary series of 0.5 ml, 4 weeks apart for ages 12 through 17. And if they are immunocompromised, ages 12 through 17, you can give them the third dose 4 weeks after the second dose. So some considerations of the mRNA population or mRNA vaccine in our pediatric population. With those mRNA vaccines, we can give them without regard to timing. So if you need to catch up, I know I heard that like 40-some% of kids are behind on their general vaccines. And so you may give their COVID vaccines with their other vaccines that they need to catch up on. Same type of recommendation, separate the site by an inch or more, use the appropriate muscles, etc. Did go ahead and include these. Now, if you are going to be giving the COVID vaccines and you're ordering the pediatric ones, all those will be coming with a 25 gauge 1-inch needle. So if you're going to want to use something different because of using a different muscle group, then make sure you're going to have those at your site. So here's those summaries that I recommended and told you were available. These are actually on the interim clinical considerations for COVID vaccine website. And you can Google it, or I actually have it here on the slides. And it's very, very nice because it breaks down each individual product and tells you when they need to get it. Now, they haven't added Novavax yet because, of course, it was just authorized last night. But I do want to point out one particular thing. If you'll notice here between doses 1 and 2, it identifies that between dose 1 and 2, this could be between 4 and 8 weeks. The extended interval is particularly in those individuals who are 12 to 39-year-old males, because that's the population that we've seen an increase in myocarditis, which I'll talk about in just a second. And in those individuals, males 12 to 39 years old, who have no other condition, it's recommended that you consider extending the interval, because if you extend the interval, then it decreases the likelihood of myocarditis. So this is the summary for most individuals. So we're talking about not those who are immunocompromised. We'll go over to the summary of the schedule for moderate to severely immunocompromised. You'll see that the interval between dose 1 and 2 goes back to that minimum interval. Because if you have an immunocompromised individual, they do not recommend that you extend that dose, because the risk of severe disease outweighs the very, very, very minimal risk of myocarditis, and the risk of any cardiovascular impact is greater from COVID than from any minimal risk from the vaccine itself. So just a couple of things. We keep a very close eye on side effects, those kinds of things. So, making sure you're using the correct dosage based on the child's age at the day of the vaccination. Looking at, we're getting it the recommendation is that everyone get the vaccine regardless of underlying medical conditions. They're very, 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 very minimal. individuals who the COVID vaccine is not recommended for. Typically, that is due to a severe allergy. Side effects with the mRNA vaccines, pain, swelling, erythema, fever, fatigue, those were actually less in the pediatric population than in the adult population. If needed, antipyretic, analgesic, something like that, post-vaccination. We do not recommend aspirin, of course, though, in those 18 years and under, due to the risk of rice syndrome. So I wanted to just throw in some vaccine error tips. We wanted to make sure that everybody understands the vaccines are not interchangeable for the primary series. So if you start with one, you got to finish the primary series. And if something needs to be if the vaccine, you need to make sure you're diluting it if it needs to. Don't dilute it if it doesn't. You make sure you have the right product type for the person's age and dose. Checking the cap color and particularly the label. And keeping those wall charts posted in the vaccine storage area. Always following TED to help avoid those COVID-19 vaccine errors, type, expiration, and dose in particular. Also reporting any vaccine adverse events to both VAERS and then also contacting the COVID-19 hotline to get those further instructions. We do monitor them here in West Virginia as well because there's delayed information from VAERS. Then I want to talk a little bit about the myocarditis. In these studies in these children, no cases occurred, keeping in mind that they only did follow-up for 7 days. But the cases that did occur in the population, if you will, occurred within the first couple of weeks. So it is possible, but we don't anticipate it as much with these younger kids for a couple of reasons. One, the dose is lower. Two, we think that the mechanism has to do with the hormones, and that's why the 12 to 39 age group is more likely to experience this. Most of the incident does resolve. Did want to mention in the older children, it usually was in the first week after the second dose, if it is going to occur, and it does tend to resolve. However, and then the other thing that particularly the CDC and the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices noted was that it's important to recognize that myocarditis and pericarditis are much higher associated with COVID-19 disease itself than the small risk from vaccination. So this slide just specifically goes into the 8-week interval, specifically between those first and second doses. In some people, particularly males aged 12 to 39, because it has been shown to decrease the risk for myocarditis. However, that shorter interval of 3 weeks for Pfizer, 4 weeks for Moderna is recommended for those who are moderately to severely immunocompromised, all adults age 65 and older, and in situations where in the community levels are high or there's an individual's high risk of severe disease. So I went ahead and included the fact sheets. You can always find these. The Board of Pharmacy always has them updated, as well as they're always on the CDC's website. So I didn't add the Novavax. I meant to, and I forgot to, but I think it's on here at the end. But if not, it's on the CDC's website. Now to tell you a little bit about Novavax. So it is an adjuvanted vaccine, intramuscular injection. So we're going back to, we've got lots of vaccines that are adjuvant vaccines. It is only authorized for 18 and older though, and it's a 2-dose primary series, 3 weeks apart. It's half a ml each. Most of the side effects were very similar to what we saw with other vaccines. It's anticipated that this will kind of fill that void for patients that were not willing to get the new technology of an mRNA vaccine. Each of the vials has 10 doses of a half ml. This one is only good for 6 hours after you puncture the vial. But the nice thing is it can be stored in the refrigerator before you puncture it. So no special freezing or ultra low cold or anything like that. So at least that's good. But once you puncture it, it's only good for 6 hours. This product will not be coming out immediately. There are some quality items that the company has to demonstrate to the FDA prior to the product being available for ordering. But we will be launching that product as soon as it's available for pre-order here in West Virginia. And so we'll be getting that out to providers here as soon as it's available. So I wanted to bring this up. We do have an amazing tool that's really the first of its kind here in West Virginia, or first of its kind in the country, and has exceeded really everybody's expectations. It's the COVID-19 vaccine due date calculator. It enables individuals and healthcare providers and everybody, rather than having to keep up with all the different situations and guideline changes and those kinds of things, to go to the website and none of the information is collected. You can go to the website, put in birth date, the type of your first vaccine, the number of vaccines that you've received, whether or not you're immunocompromised, and the date of your most recent COVID-19 vaccine. And then you get the due date for your vaccination and the recommended type of your COVID vaccine. And for all the healthcare providers, there's a medical information button at the bottom, and it provides all the medical information that went into formulating the recommendation there. And so it's incredibly helpful. As you guys know, the guidelines have changed so very quickly. And vaccines are coming out and all those kinds of things. But it really helps to let people know when they're actually eligible for an additional vaccine, and makes them able to stay up to date on their vaccination status. So here's a screenshot of how that works and the little medical info button there. And again, none of that information is stored at all in the system. So I wanted to talk a little bit about therapeutics. Right now, for outpatient options, we do have 4 available: Paxlovid, remdesivir, bebtelovimab, and molnupiravir. So here are the NIH COVID-19 treatment guidelines, particularly for non-hospitalized patients. So when you have patients that do not require hospitalization or supplemental oxygen. So if a patient's already on oxygen, like in their everyday life before they got COVID, we're looking at, are they not requiring an increase in that oxygen? Okay, so I get that question a lot. Here's the preferred therapies based off of what is working best. First line is Paxlovid. Second line is remdesivir. Okay, if you'll remember, remdesivir was one of our first medications that came out, and it was used inpatient. We now can use it outpatient 3-day infusion. Now, our last 2 options are truly only alternative therapies to be used only when neither of the preferred therapies are available, feasible, or clinically appropriate. And that's bebtelovimab and molnupiravir. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of them and then be able to answer any questions that you have. So Paxlovid and Paxlovid Renal. These originally came out, they come pre-packaged in the 5-day course, but they are 2 separate products now. So it's the I've spoken too much today. Nirmatrelvir, still didn't say it right, tablets with ritonavir, okay? You get two 150 milligram tablets and 100 milligram tablet of ritonavir. All three are packaged together, and you take 3 in the morning and 3 in the evening for 5 days. Now, if the patient has renal impairment, meaning an estimated GFR between 30 and 60, then you have to reduce the dose. And then it goes down to one of the 150 milligram tablets of nirmatrelvir, sorry, there we go, and ritonavir. And they take 2 tablets in the morning and 2 in the evening. So those are 2 completely different products, and it needs to be specified when prescribed which product and how to take it. It is not recommended for Paxlovid to be utilized in an eGFR less than 30, and also for severe hepatic impairment. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind, and that's why you may get a lot of the pharmacists that are calling and asking about renal and hepatic impairment, because these medications would require adjustment, okay? Just to keep that in mind, and simply putting as directed on a Paxlovid script isn't going to cut it, because there are 2 available products. Now, there is a great resource out here. It's a Paxlovid patient eligible screening checklist tool for prescribers. And it is simply that. It is a checklist to assist in prescribing and identifying, because there are quite a few drug interactions and pieces that, I see a typo there, sorry about that. So the patient has to be positive for SARS-CoV-2. They do not have to bring you proof. If you as a prescriber feel comfortable that they are in fact positive, that satisfies that requirement. Now that the medication is more readily available, initially there were requirements because the medication was not as readily available as it is now. So patient has to be over 18 or over 12 and weigh at least 40 kilograms. They have to have 1 or more risk factors for progression to severe COVID-19. They need to have symptoms of mild to moderate COVID-19, and they need to be within the first 5 days of symptom onset. They actually recommend within the EUA that the prescriber put like the fill date. So it needs to be filled by on the prescription. So of course not a requirement, but it is a recommendation. The Paxlovid works by inhibiting the viral replication. So if the patient starts it on day 7, not going to do any good, okay? They cannot require hospitalization because their disease has progressed to severe or critical COVID. No renal impairment, no severe hepatic impairment, and no hypersensitivity to the ingredients or Stevens-Johnson syndrome, those kind of things. There are quite a few drug-drug interactions with this medication. That's probably what you hear about most. I have put the link to the to several drug interaction checkers, the fact sheet for prescribers, the checklist, all those kinds of things here. It's important to understand that while there are some contraindicated medications, meaning you can't utilize them, most of those, or many of the drug interactions that initially came out, you can avoid by holding the drug for a certain period of time, or modifying therapy. That includes the statins. HIV treatment can be continued, monitor for side effects. So it's important to recognize that this is considered your first line therapy in patients for whom It's not contraindicated. And most of the contraindications are either because of renal failure or renal impairment, not failure, renal impairment, or because a medication is truly contraindicated. So just keep that in mind. You have probably heard about Paxlovid rebound. With Paxlovid rebound, what's happening is the patient will complete the 5-day course, and then within a few days after completing, and they'll test negative within a few days after completing the course, they'll have symptoms come back and they'll test positive again. There is no indication that it is necessary to complete another course of therapy. The current recommendation is that they should quarantine for another or stay in isolation for another 5 days and continue to mask as long as and then after that second 5-day period, if they are symptom and fever free, then they should be okay to come out at that point. Wanted to talk a little bit about remdesivir. We saw it in inpatient treatment before. Now we're using it in outpatient. Remember, that was our second line treatment. So you can do a 200 milligram IV infusion on day 1, followed by 100 once daily on days 2 and 3. Has to be started within 7 days of symptoms. And these infusions are 30 to 120 minutes long. So just depending on how your infusion center is set up, and you have to monitor the patient for another hour. So definitely not as convenient because patient's got to come back 3 days. So let's say they're diagnosed on a Friday. Your infusion center may not be open on Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. Definitely not as convenient as, let's say, an oral therapy. Looking at bebtelovimab, if you'll remember, gosh, even a year ago, everybody was looking for monoclonals. Monoclonals were the best thing. They were the first line treatment. We've really seen a change in this, and this is primarily because with variants, we have seen the virus be able to evade and the monoclonal antibodies become ineffective. As a matter of fact, we had 5 or 6 monoclonal antibody treatments, and all of them have become ineffective against the current variants, with the exception of bebtelovimab. And so it is the only one we have available. It's considered essentially third-ish line. So we really should only be using it in the patients for whom Paxlovid really is contraindicated. And there's a couple of reasons. The feds, there is no additional federal money for COVID therapeutics. So we've been told that unless there's additional federal funding, we will run out of, we had originally been told mid-July, but the feds reallocated some money and put it in therapeutics. So they were able to purchase some additional, but unless there's some additional funding, the bebtelovimab is not going to be readily available. So we really should be screening patients. And right now, Paxlovid is readily available from West Virginia and nationwide. Whereas bebtelovimab, we get very few doses, or that's true nationwide, because there is not a readily available supply. Because it's on an emergency use authorization, there's essentially no incentive for companies to continue to make it, especially because this virus has evaded the other monoclonals. So it's important that we are truly selecting patients that this is really their only course of treatment. So just keep that in mind as you're going through, because we do have other treatment options for patients. And then the last one I want to touch on is molnupiravir. It was came out at the same time as Paxlovid. Not as effective as Paxlovid, if you will, but it doesn't have all the drug interactions. It is an alternative when the others are not accessible or clinically appropriate. So the same thing as bebtelovimab. So it's only for 18 and older, has to be used in the first 5 days. And that's the same thing as Paxlovid. You got to start it within the first 5 days, and it's not for pre-exposure or post-exposure prophylaxis. So it can only be used in treatment. Couple of things about this one. This one is 4 capsules twice a day for 5 days with or without food. It's not recommended in pregnancy. It's not contraindicated, but it is not recommended in pregnancy. And a couple of the counseling pieces that I would want you to be aware of. Females of childbearing age should use another reliable method of contraception. Make sure they're using it correctly for the duration of treatment, as well as 4 days after the last dose. And I think that females are often very used to antivirals, antibiotics, that kind of thing, doing this. The last bullet point, I think, is the one that that's a counseling point that most pharmacists and healthcare providers are not used to counseling on, and most patients would find difficult to be compliant with. Males of reproductive potential who are sexually active with females of childbearing potential need to use a reliable method of contraceptive for 3 months after the last dose. And that is because of some animal study, because of a single animal study during the trial period. So just wanted to give you those. That is another treatment option. Those are our 4 treatment options. I got one more therapeutic for you, and this is Evusheld. But Evusheld is not a treatment option. It is a pre-exposure prophylaxis. So for individuals for whom they don't have COVID, but and they've not had an exposure to COVID. So this is for patients that either they are moderate to severe immunocompromised because of some sort of condition, or we know that the vaccine did not work. Okay, so we'll see this in many of our cancer patients, patients who are taking meds that we know severely impacts their immune system. So, and then I'll tell you, this is across the country, we are seeing Evusheld being significantly underutilized. Patients that are not able to mount an adequate immune system to COVID vaccination can significantly benefit from this. Now, it is it's a monoclonal antibody. It's 2 different ones. And so we need to keep in mind, it be used in those 12 and older, that it is an option. So if you have those kinds of patients, keep this in mind, because it could be an additional option and tool in our toolbox to protect these patients that really need it. So it's not for treatment of COVID, and it's not for those who have been exposed and need protection. This is only for patients who have pre-exposure prophylaxis, and it's not in place of vaccination. It is only for those who have some sort of immune compromise, be it medication, medical, whatever, and either the vaccinations aren't working or they're not getting an adequate, their body's not able to mount that adequate immune system response. We do have this medication spread well throughout the state. So at quite a few infusion centers, it is an IM injection. If they get a vaccine, the Evusheld needs to be administered 2 weeks after the vaccination. If you have a patient that you're interested in getting this for, if you call the COVID hotline, we'll be able to arrange to get it for your patient and get them hooked up at the closest locality that has it in your area. So I think, believe it or not, I got through all of the therapeutics, the variants, and the vaccinations. So there is all of my contact information, including my cell. And I want to open it up for comments and questions.
Thanks so much, Dr. Capehart. Looks like we have time for a couple of questions. One of the questions asks, can we tell our clients that the Novavax will be available soon? When do you think it will be available?
So I would anticipate that it will be available soon, but the feds, I was just on a call yesterday and I have another call at 2 o'clock today. They have not given us the date. A lot of it will depend on how quickly the quality testing is finalized with the FDA. I hesitate to say a time period, but I would think it would be relatively soon, within weeks, not months.
Another question asks, does the term up to date include the booster series as well?
Yes. So, and usually I have that in and I took it out today. So we have gone away from fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated typically only meant the primary series. Up to date means that you've had your primary series as well as all eligible boosters. That means you are up to date with your vaccines. Excellent question.
Another asks, do you recommend taking the flu vaccine and COVID vaccine together?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. I actually did get my flu and COVID together last year. I will probably do the same if the timing works. There are a couple of companies that are testing a flu and COVID together. I will tell you that the side effects in terms of being more tired, draggy, just feeling worn out, and blah, did go up when individuals, so there were more reported side effects when individuals got the flu and the COVID. But there is no reason in terms of efficacy, it working, there's no reason not to. I'll tell you, my personal opinion, I'd rather feel blah once and get both of them and have my immune system work and be good to go than feel blah from the flu shot and then blah from the COVID shot twice. So I would recommend going ahead and getting them the same time. There's no reason from any data not to.
Well,
All right, so I'm coming back on in just a moment once I can get my settings. Here we are, and here's Shirley. Hopefully my video will start back up. I was having problems with this earlier. Here we go. All right, I am back. Okay, so we have a few minutes of our own time to have our own Q&A with Shirley Sullivan here. So in a minute, we will start that Q&A. If you have any questions, you can enter them into the chat or the Q&A box. While we're waiting, I'd like to invite you all to next week's webinar, which will be on CMS's 5-star quality rating system for nursing homes. That will be next Wednesday at 2 p.m. We also host office hours live chats twice a week. If you are looking for one-on-one advice for your facility, you can pop in during our office hours and shoot us a message, and someone will be there to answer your questions. Those are every Tuesday at 8 a.m. and every Thursday at 2 p.m. You can find the links to those live chats and our webinars in the newsletter we send out each Friday called the Last Minute Lowdown. If you don't think you're on the email, or if you don't think you're on the list to get that newsletter, you can email me and I will get you on that list. In a moment, I will drop my email in the chat. You can also email me if you would like a recording of today's webinar sent to you. And now we will look to see if there are any questions. I believe we got one earlier, Shirley, that you answered, but if you want, you can read that and read your answer back to our audience here today.
Yeah, sure. So the question was, when we are diagnosed and based on point of care test, how do we even know which variant we have and how much does that really matter? And I would assume that the rates are based on a more definitive test. And so, yeah, the point of care testing will only tell you if you have COVID or not. It does not tell you what variant that you have. Now, the CDC does track the variants, and the way they do that is they take a proportion of the test that they get from the labs, and the labs, like in Pennsylvania, we send between 10 and 35 samplings from labs to the CDC to do genomic testing. And then they look at what the different variants are, and then they kind of make that proportional to the population. And that's how they kind of figure out what variants are circulating in all the different areas. And I did put a link here under the Q&A about the genomic surveillance, if you wanted to look at that.
All right, and I'm not sure if everyone can read the Q&A or if it's just us panelists, so I just dropped that link into the chat as well, just in case. I'm not sure what they can see on their screens.
Okay,
Let's
perfect.
see, do we have any more questions? I don't see any, and we're running pretty long on this webinar, especially since they answered some questions in that recording. So it is 3 p.m. and I think maybe we should probably go ahead and wrap up. What do you think, Shirley?
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to reach out to Shirley directly, you can email her at ssullivan@qualityinsights.org. Her phone number is 1-800-642-8686, extension 7805. And you can check out our other interviews by visiting qualityinsights.org/QIN/multimedia. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today.